I think we all know who has the most wins on the PBA Tour, and you could probably easily name at least the top 3, but could you name the top 10 all-time titleists in the exact order? That's a little trickier, as there are 1 or 2 surprising names in the top 10 that you might miss. So while you take some time to think about that, let me tell you about today's video. Well, it's quite straightforward. I'm going to be going through the top 10 list of all-time title holders, and I'll also talk a little bit about how much I think this list might change in the future. Obviously, this list will likely change in the near future as there are some active players on this list, but generally, the higher up the list you go, the longer it's going to take for the list to change. But we'll run through it all in this video, and we're going to get going with number 10, EJ Tackett with 27 titles. The fact that EJ Tackett has already cracked the top 10 with 27 titles at just 33 years of age is remarkable. In fact, it's almost scary because you start to wonder just how high he can climb in the next few years. As we will soon see, he's not that far away from the other bowlers on this list and could easily crack the top 5 before too long. Out of those 27 titles, 7 of those are majors, which already puts him up there with some of the best in the game. Honestly, he has a real chance to get into the top 3, and knowing EJ, I'll probably have to update this list next season because he would have jumped higher up the list. Number 9, Mike Albee with 29 titles. This one I think some might have forgotten when trying to figure out the top 10, but make no mistake, Mike Albee was extremely good, particularly in the 80s. He was arguably the best player in that decade, winning 17 titles in total. The 90s were arguably almost as dominant in another way for him, as he won 9 titles but actually won 4 majors in the 90s alone. He won 29 titles in total and was one of the best players in the 80s and 90s. Number 8, Dick Webber with 30 titles. Now on to an absolute legend of the game and someone who was there at the very start of the PBA Tour. Dick Webber really was the original star of bowling and was well loved and respected for what he brought to the game. He's just one of 8 bowlers to break the 30 title mark, and of course he achieved all of that during a very different era of bowling. Number 7, Jason Belmonte with 32 titles. Jason Belmonte is the second active player on this list, and just like EJ, it's very likely he will rise further. How far he can actually climb is up for debate though, as he's now 42, so his career will at some point start to wind down. He's already gone 2 years without a singles title win, but he still has a good few years left in him at the top, and therefore I think it's only a matter of time before he wins again. He's still got a realistic shot of breaking 40 titles if he can start winning multiple titles again over the next 3 to 5 years. I think for Belmonte to truly be in the greatest of all time conversation, reaching 40 titles would help that a lot. That, along with the 15 majors he currently has, is going to place him very highly against all the other greats of the game. He's already sealed his legacy if we're honest. It's now all about how much he can add to that legacy. Number 6, Mark Roth with 34 titles. Mark Roth absolutely dominated the 70s with his high rev style that was ahead of its time. He was second only to Earl Anthony and just dominated the tour. While he still won in the 80s, that decade wasn't anywhere near as good for Roth. There's a number of factors for this, such as his health, but also how the game changed with the introduction of urethane bowling balls. It meant the rest of the field started to catch up with Roth, and by the late 80s, his career had taken a big dive. But even so, what he did in his prime was remarkable, and to be honest, he probably should have won even more titles. I just released a video where I look at what happened to Mark Roth in the 80s and 90s, and you can watch that by clicking the link above. Number 5, Parker Bone III with 35 titles. I class Parker Bone III as the second best lefty of all time behind Earl Anthony. His style was so smooth, and the 90s was when he was most dominant. The only slight negative you could say about him is his record in major titles. He only won 1 major in his prime and had a lot of title match losses in the big events. He did end up with 3 majors after winning 2 at the end of his career, but when you compare that to the other greats, his major record is definitely one of the worst. But that still doesn't take away from the fact though that he was one of the best bowlers we've seen on tour and clearly is deserving of being in the top 5 of all-time titles. Number 4. Pete Weber with 37 titles. Weber had many ups and downs in his career. He stormed onto the tour in the 80s as a young rising star and won 13 titles in that decade. Towards the late 90s, personal problems caused him to receive a ban from the tour and his career could have easily been derailed. Luckily though, he got a second chance once the tour was bought out in 2000 and the PBA saw an opportunity to turn Weber's antics into good TV. Not only did it work for the tour, but Weber's career sparked back into life and the 2000s would be another excellent decade for him. He finished his career with 2 major wins at the 2012 US Open and the 2013 Tournament of Champions to really cement his legacy. Number 3. Norm Duke with 40 titles. Norm became just the 3rd player to reach 40 titles after winning back-to-back titles at the very end of his career in 2019. Reaching 40 titles put him in some elite company, as we will soon see. He was just a class act and always was so fun to watch on TV. His performances in the majors were sublime and he finished with 7 majors in total. The fact that he won 2 titles back-to-back at age 54 shows just what a talent he was, and it showed how he was able to adapt to the changes in the game throughout his entire career. Number 2. Earl Anthony with 43 titles. I don't need to talk about Earl's achievements here because we all know what he did. He basically terrorized all the other players on the tour and just did things nobody could match. For a long time, Earl officially had 41 titles, but that increased to 43 in 2008 when the PBA started including the ABC Masters titles if they were won by a PBA member. When Earl turned up to a tournament, everybody basically knew that he was basically going to win, and he was just head and shoulders above everybody else at that time. Even as I mentioned earlier, in the 70s, Mark Roth absolutely dominated the tour, and yet Earl was just even better than that. And even though Earl is second in wins for many, he is and always will be the greatest bowler of all time. Because don't forget, he won all of those titles in just a 14-year period. Number 1. Walter Ray Williams Jr. with 47 titles. And finally, we have Walter Ray Williams Jr. I think many who were around in Earl's day probably assumed that his record would never be beaten. Well, it obviously was beaten eventually, and Walter's biggest asset was his longevity. He was on tour for far longer than Earl, and his wins came in a much longer period of time, but that just shows how timeless his game was because he was able to compete in every single era. I really believe that Walter would still be able to compete if he was in his prime right now. He was just that good. For now, Walter will clearly remain at the top for some time. Whether that will ever change is up for debate. So that is the top 10 list, and now this brings us on to the question of how much this list might change in the next few years. Well, really, it's about 2 guys right now, Belmonte and EJ. Both of them have an excellent chance to break into the top 3. They both have a chance to surpass Walter, although I would say that would be harder for Belmonte given his age, although it's still not impossible. It only takes 3 to 5 years where he starts winning a hell of a lot of titles, which he is capable of, but he is 42, so it's just becoming that much more unlikely as the years go on. I think the last 2 years where he hasn't won a title in a singles title has definitely hurt his chances, but I still think he's got a chance to match Norm Duke at 40 titles. EJ is really the one that is the danger, I think, to break or at least match Walter's record, and that really is because of his age. He's still got so much time left, and really expect both players in EJ and Belmo to climb this list over the next few seasons. There are of course other players who could break into the top 10 by the end of their career. Anthony Simonsen is the most obvious name, I think, who currently has 16 titles, so he could easily get into the late 20s or early 30s. Jesper Svensson is another who has a chance depending on how his career pans out, although I would argue that it's tougher for him being an international player. And then of course there's the future players who will break out. Who knows who will rise to the top in the next few years. Clearly the majority of this list will remain the same for some time, except for EJ and Belmo, who will start to move up. But let me know what you think. Where do you think Belmonte and Tackett will finish on the list? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Well, that brings us to an end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed this one, and if you have, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button below. Well, that's going to do it from me for today, and as always, thank you bowling fans, and see you all next time.